Hello, future challengers, or current challengers looking for ways to improve. This is the fourth in a series of videos about how to succeed in CounterSide Ranked Gauntlet PvP mode. Last time, we talked about deployment placement and time. This time, we're going to talk about several important defensive mechanics, namely barriers, MDL, valid hit absorption, and protection. There won't be much math in this video, but the next one, where I cover resistances and evasion, definitely will have lots of math. If that prospect excites you, and you haven't done so already, get subscribed so you'll know when I release the second part of the CounterSide Defensive Mechanics Overview. At the end of this two-part mini-series, you'll always be able to figure out why your backline did or did not suddenly die, how to build and deploy a team to keep them safer, and how to more effectively cripple your opponent's backline. So let's jump in. MDL, shown as Damage Taken Limit in the stats screen, is a stat that exists on all SSR defenders except Replacer Knight, but not on any R or SR defenders. Rafaela Jury also has it during tower form and up to 10 seconds after. MDL is represented as a percentage, and shows up in the stats page of defenders who have it. We'll use Awakened Jake here as an example. Any extra damage from a single hit, which hits him for more than 10% of his max health, will be reduced by 96% after all normal damage calculations are made. In other words, any excess damage is only 1/25th of its normal amount. So, something that would damage him for 8% of his max health in one hit would still do 8%, but something that would normally damage him for 35% of his health would instead only damage him for 11%, and something that would damage him for half his health would damage him for around 11.5% instead. It's important to note that MDL applies to individual instances of damage. If a single skill hits 3 separate times, each of those hits would have an MDL check, and not the combined total of them. That means the best way to counter defenders with MDL is fast attacks that deal lower damage, so that MDL never gets triggered for those hits. That's why Defender Melter units like Admin Rifleman and Ifrit tend to attack very quickly, and usually prioritize equipment sets, which give them attack speed bonuses rather than higher damage hits. Almost all SSR defenders have 10% MDL, but Awakened Hilda has 5%, which along with her self-shielding can make her feel extremely oppressive for anyone not using Defender Melters with proper equipment. Evolved One also has 5% MDL, and Rafaela Jury has 4% MDL despite having a deployment cost of 3, because she's a fair and balanced unit. Rearmed Alex has 15% MDL, which means she should take fewer big hits to kill, but we'll return to why she's so hard to kill when we talk about barriers. So let's talk about barriers now. At the basic level, barriers obviously absorb damage. It's worth mentioning that they don't absorb percentage health burn effects, which go around barriers, and can still kill units with active barriers on them. Damage done to barriers is also affected by MDL, so Awakened Hilda, for example, can only lose up to around 5% of her health worth of barrier per hit. Same with regular Horizon, when she becomes enraged at half health. All individual barrier effects stack with each other, and importantly, each individual barrier will absorb all damage from a single hit, and prevent damage from overflowing to health or to other active barriers until it's brought to 0 or the duration runs out. That's why the tiny barriers that Rearmed Alex and regular Horizon make cause them to be so much more difficult to kill. That's also why dropping backline assassins like Kang or Rearmed Elizabeth basically does no damage to backliners if they have an active barrier on them. One last cool thing about barriers is that applying a barrier to units wakes them up if they were asleep. This is helpful against Lily, and I guess Lulu, if you ever run into one. But Gremory's Fog will put them right back to sleep if it's still in the field when you wake your units up by giving them a barrier. We're getting a bit into the weeds now, but you should know that barrier reflux effects like Nayubin's passive and Grendel's special enhancement can only destroy one barrier at a time, unless the description of the barrier states that it's not removable, in which case obviously it'll fail. Now, onto valid hits. The number of valid hits that skills have is shown near their cooldown, if they have one. These are area attacks, but the number of valid hits does not mean that it can only damage that many units. The number of valid hits are the number of times a skill will do full damage. Anything inside of a skill's area of effect will be damaged, but only the units closest to the source of the damage will take full damage, up to the valid hit limit. Usually the source is the attacking unit itself, but some ultimates fall from above, and valid hits are counted from whatever is closest to the point of impact. Also, Awakened Jushiyun's counterattack damages the furthest back units first. Any units damaged beyond the valid hit limit instead only take 30% of the normal damage, and also cannot be critically hit. A few skills don't do any damage at all outside of valid hits, but that's always written in the skill description. If you want your skills to actually kill the enemy backline, try to choose units with high valid hits on their specials and ultimates. Similarly, if you use backline assassins, try to avoid waiting until there are too many enemy backliners clumped together because you risk not killing your intended targets. Valid hit absorption is another SSR defender mechanic which doesn't appear on any other units, except non-rearmed Titan for some reason. The rearmed version loses this stat. When units have valid hit absorption, it's written as a percentage, either 100% or 200%. Regular SSR defenders, except Stronghold and Replacer Knight, have 100% VHA, but Stronghold is 2 units and also sucks, so it both balances out and doesn't matter. Currently, only Awakened SSR defenders and non-rearmed Titan have 200% VHA. 100% VHA means that a skill hitting the unit will count as 2 valid hits, and 200% VHA means hitting it will count as 3 valid hits. In effect, SSR defenders are going to do a much better job of keeping your back line alive than most strikers and other tanky non-defenders, because they'll eat the valid hits, and your backline won't be damaged nearly as badly by large area attacks. For the record, VHA does not mean the unit takes any extra damage. The lack of valid hit absorption is the reason why sometimes your backline units will seemingly explode when they're behind just a striker or SR defender or something. Some area skill must have grazed them, and the damage that reached them was still a valid hit. Understanding valid hits and valid hit absorption means that when you see a big enemy ultimate skill about to go off, you'll know that you can probably save your back line from most of the damage by deploying an SSR defender onto the field before the skill goes off. Einstein Zwei can also be a good option for valid hit absorption, but as strikers, they don't have any MDL, so you'll have to decide when it's worth it on a case-by-case basis. Similarly, you'll know that if your opponent opens with rearmed Esterosa or something, you can bring out your area damage units and have a good chance of killing their back line if your opponent doesn't follow up with more frontliners soon. Last and least, we'll talk about protection. Protection is a stat that all defender units give to all allied units at their back, except other defenders. Protection reduces all damage taken by 7% per single unit, so Admin Shieldman and Stronghold can provide up to 2 stacks, as long as both individual units are alive. The cap for this bonus is 35%, and it's applied after all other damage calculations have been done. You'll know it's working when you see the word protected appearing in blue when protected units take damage, as long as you haven't changed the damage/buff game setting to none. Realistically, knowing this is probably never going to affect your team building or decision making in PvP, but I figured we may as well cover all defensive mechanics while we're here. So now we've covered nearly all of the non-intuitive defensive mechanics. My next guide video will cover the last one, damage tolerance, as well as why sometimes ranged attacks are melee attacks, how most resistance stats all stack together with anti-damage, how with enough hit stat you completely ignore enemy evasion, and other arcane but ultimately pretty useful information for deciding how to gear your units, and which ones to bring or avoid bringing if certain enemies are giving you trouble. If you like this video, please give it a like, and get subscribed so you'll be notified when part 2 comes out. Hopefully, that'll be around a week after this one or less. Thanks for watching.